We're going to learn a little bit about dinosaurs tonight. Everyone knows a lot about dinosaurs, but I bet you're going to learn a little bit something new about dinosaurs tonight. And in particular, our goal is to look at this subject from within the biblical worldview, which is our main focus here at these apologetics programs. Our goal is to help people understand how scientific findings can be interpreted from within the biblical worldview. It's important to understand that what science is teaching are not facts, they're interpretations of scientific findings. And findings are interpreted within your worldview. Science is very axiomatic. Your presuppositions govern your interpretations of your findings. And but in order to correctly interpret the world, we really do need the Bible, because that's the only source of information we have that goes all the way back to that very first day when God created the world. And so we look to it for help and understanding. And so we're going to be looking at dinosaurs and try to answer the question of how they fit into biblical history. Because remember, the Bible starts with that very first day when God created the world. So dinosaurs have to fit in there somewhere. And so we're going to look at that. Let me just quickly review some dinosaur names. I don't want to spend very long with this because I got lots of information to cover, but just a little refresher on dinosaur names, so when they come up later in the program, you'll be able to, they'll come to mind a little quicker for you. Okay, just what dinosaurs are. Dinosaurs are an extinct group of these really massive reptiles. It is a specific taxonomic group, and I throw this up there just to make sure you know that there are a lot of things that we tend to think of as dinosaurs that are not actually. Can't see this graphic very well, but like the pterodactyl, the pterosaurs are not officially classified as a dinosaur, nor the dimetrodon you see there, or even the plesiosaur. Some of the extinct massive animals that we know from the fossil record are not actually dinosaurs, but let's review a few of those that are, okay? There's actually two main classes of dinosaurs, the ornithischians and the saurischians, but in reality, there are not a whole lot of different types of dinosaurs. One of the big groups, dinosaurs are probably best known to us because they were the largest and most terrifying creatures that God ever made. And the theropods fit in this category big time, as probably being one of the most terrifying animals that ever lived. The name theropod means beast-footed. Now, not all dinosaurs are really big. It's the ones that are famous. The ones that were really big are the ones that we remember the best because they were so big. But not all theropods were as big as this guy. They ranged in size all the way from the size of a chicken all the way up to the size of this guy right here, the Giganosaurus, which is about 50 foot long. Had a skull about 6 foot long. It could reach down and pick you up and swallow you whole. Or the sauropods, their name means lizard-footed. What did some of these names mean? Sauropods. Sauropods were the biggest animals that have ever roamed the earth, or at least they are thought to be. There's still a little bit of a debate about one of these, whether the findings are a little bit fragmentary. The blue whale still is there in contention as being the biggest animal that's been on Earth, but the sauropods were definitely the biggest land animal that was ever on the Earth. And unlike the theropods that we saw previously, these were plant eaters, as far as we know. Let's look at a few more. The ankylosaur, you see here, ankylosaur. Had big protective plates on its back called osteoderms or scutes, kind of like a crocodile's, except much more dense and protective. Also had a big, massive club on its tail there, a big bone-smashing club on its tail for protection as well, and a crown-like structure on its head. See what looks like a little crown? We'll see the ankylosaur a little bit again later. Notice it also has what is like a bird's beak. A lot of the dinosaurs, and instead of having teeth, a lot of them did have teeth, but a lot of them had beaks, similar to a bird's or turtle or tortoise. The stegosaur also had a bird's beak, not well shown here, but the stegosaur, probably one of the most recognizable dinosaurs. It seems like everyone can recognize a stegosaur. Had those two rows of those big plates standing up along its back, which were probably protective, although some of these structures, the purpose of some of these is heavily debated. And you got your ceratops. One of the most famous of the ceratops is the triceratops, because he had 3 horns up there on his head, but the ceratops is shown here. Little baby ceratops beneath it, if you can see it in the grass there. Then you got the hadrosaur. Hadrosaur was a massive dinosaur. The biggest of the hadrosaurs were also about 50 foot long and like a duck bill. Had a duck-like bill instead of teeth or a bird's beak. Had a little duck bill. We'll see the hadrosaur again a little bit later too, as we discuss some of these and some of the discoveries here. But one of the things we really want to tackle in this talk is what happened to the dinosaurs. They are the biggest animals that ever roamed the earth, but how did they go extinct? That's the question. And we want to look at this from within the biblical worldview. And again, it's important to understand that to understand earth history, we really need the Bible, because the Bible, although you could argue it's not a science book, and many people argue that, it is a history book. I would describe it as a history book of God's interaction with the world. But it does contain a lot of history, and it goes all the way back to day one. And so I think for any of past Earth events, especially of significance, like the extinction of such a massive group of animals, we need to look to the Bible for insight. And I think this is one of the areas where you just can't know the truth without the Bible, and I'll kind of try to explain what I mean by that. But the question as to what happened to the dinosaurs is still somewhat debated, but the secular scientific community is generally in agreement that there was probably a major asteroid impact that was responsible. Asteroid impacts seem to be their explanation for most of the mysteries in the solar system. Everything that's unique in the solar system, it's an asteroid impact. How'd the moon get there? It's an asteroid impact. Why is that planet spinning the wrong way? It's an asteroid impact. Asteroids, super asteroids all over the solar system, creating all kinds of uniqueness. And same way with the dinosaurs. Big mystery of the dinosaurs, what happened? It's thought that maybe there was a big asteroid that struck the Earth and caused a major climate shift. So it caused some climatic change that the dinosaurs were unable to survive, and they all went extinct. The problem with this is there's a lot of animals alive today that are in the same layers of the fossil record that the dinosaurs are found in that are doing just fine. And many of these were much more environmentally sensitive than the dinosaurs. It is in fact at this point argued whether or not the dinosaurs, or many of them, were cold-blooded, like our modern day reptiles. It's thought that many of these might in fact been warm-blooded. We have found dinosaurs within what would have been the Arctic Circle at the time that they lived. Look it up. They call them polar dinosaurs. They found literally dinosaur fossils in areas that must have been in the Arctic Circle at the time. So it is, and being that they're so large, they would be. It would even be more necessary for them to have thermal regulatory mechanisms enable them to heat themselves. So, there's arguably there are animals alive today that were more environmentally sensitive than the dinosaurs that are found in the same layers of the fossil record. So, but this is their explanation of what happened to the dinosaurs. However, being that the dinosaurs are in the fossil record, when interpreting fossils like dinosaurs from within the biblical worldview, the global flood is viewed as the cause of the massive sedimentary layers that we see in the fossil record. That these massive layers of rocks, like you see in the Grand Canyon and the fossils that are contained within them, it is argued that were probably the result of the global flood. And this flood that's described in the Bible was a global scale event. I emphasize this because you're Christians that accept evolution and accept an old age of the earth universally reject the flood as being a global event. They either believe it was a local event or it did not happen at all. It's really sad how many even scholars at our Christian universities, Bible teachers at our Christian universities, believe that there was no global flood. There was no flood at all that's described in the Bible. But you really can't read this description as being anything other than a global event. The waters prevailed so mightily upon the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heavens were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth. Birds, cattle, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm upon the earth, and every man. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils the breath of life died. These are all inclusive statements. All the high mountains and the whole heavens were covered. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils the breath of life died. There's really no way of interpreting this as anything but a global event, not a local event. And if this is a real and historical event, one thing is certain: the geology of this event has been misinterpreted because geologists today say there has been no global flood. But it's not that they just, misinterpreted the layers of fossils and rocks. They have rejected that event because there are very few people, very few educated people on earth today that don't know that the Bible describes a global flood. So they've rejected this event completely. But assuming that the fossil record is the result of a global flood, then what happened to the dinosaurs, at least those that are in the fossil record, is that they died during the global flood. And there is monumental evidence for this event. Let me just briefly summarize some of the most significant evidence for the global flood. One is the fact that the layers of rocks that fossils are found in are so massive, hundreds of feet thick. In places, these layers of rocks are kilometers thick, and they extend for hundreds and in some cases thousands of miles. The layers that you see in the Grand Canyon shown in this diagram all the way over on the right, the layers of rocks exposed in the Grand Canyon can be traced all the way from Arizona to Utah and beyond. These layers of rocks that are formed in water, sediments or particulates that are transported in fluids and deposited elsewhere, these layers that fossils are found in, these sedimentary rock layers, form in water, and they blanket the globe. Massive layers of rocks, hundreds of feet thick, that extend for miles. They are laterally continuous, horizontally indefinite. This is one of the laws of stratigraphy. We also find ocean fossils everywhere, and I mean everywhere. You can go up to the tops of every mountain chain in the world and find abundant ocean fossils. Andes and the Alps. But the fact that ocean fossils are found on the tops of mountains isn't really the big deal, because mountains can build. And fossils that were originally laid down in a floodplain can get shoved up through tectonic activities and become the top of a mountain. But it's not the fact that they're on the tops of mountains, it's the fact that ocean fossils are found in every single layer of the fossil record. When we see diagrams like this of the fossil record, we see a lot of land animals. But the reality is that the vast majority of fossils in the fossil record are ocean creatures, primarily shellfish. 95% of all fossils in the fossil record are shellfish or other types of marine invertebrates. 95% of the remaining 5% are plants. 95% of the rest are fish. Most of the rest are insects. Much less than 1% of the fossils in the fossil record are in fact land vertebrates. It's all ocean fossils. You could call the fossil record a record of clams, because that's pretty much what it is. Every place you look, you find clams. You find a land animal, you find clams right there with it. They're just everywhere. It's very difficult to explain how ocean fossils manage to cover the entire continent over and over and over again through the development of the fossil record, except through a global flood mechanism. It's such an obvious interpretation. It really is such an obvious interpretation. We also find massive graveyards. Massive graveyards, or what we call bone bed, have been discovered that contain literally thousands of dinosaur fossils alone. The picture is taken at the Dinosaur National Monument, which is located in northwest Colorado and straddles the border of Utah and protects one of the largest deposits of dinosaur fossils in existence. Multiple types of dinosaurs can be found there. Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, Stegosaurus, Allosaurus, Centrosaurus. More than half of all kinds of dinosaurs that have ever lived can be found in this one bone bed alone. And in fact, in 1940, more than 40 well-preserved allosaurs, a type of theropod, like the big Giganosaurus that is found, were all found buried together in one big mass. Massive dinosaur graveyards can be found. Massive fossil graveyards can be found. But dinosaurs are the main topic of discussion tonight. We also see fossils that show extreme preservation, almost no sign of decomposition. Fossils that must have been killed by the sediments that buried them and entombed them, preventing decomposition and allowing fossilization to take place. I mean, when you see well-preserved fossils like this fish I show you here, there's only one possible way that something like this could exist, and that it was buried catastrophically so that normal decomposition could not take place. Decomposition is the norm. When you find well-preserved fossils like this, one thing is clear: it did not just lay around on the ground. It was buried massively and rapidly before it had a chance to decompose. In 2005, a Tyrannosaurus rex was discovered in the Hell Creek Formation of Montana in North Carolina by North Carolina State University paleontologist Mary Schweitzer. But due to the weight of this Tyrannosaurus rex femur, they were unable to transport it by helicopter out of the dinosaur location where they were doing their digs, and so they had to break it in half to be able to transport it, because they wrapped these things in plaster, making them really, really heavy. And so this thing weighed like 3,000 pounds by the time they got all wrapped in plaster. And to transport it by helicopter, they had to break it in half. Anyway, when they got it back to the lab, Mary Schweitzer noticed upon unpacking it that there was tissue inside the bone. She was able to see what's called medullary bone tissue, which prompted some further microscopic analysis. So they had analyzed the bone marrow cavity and found soft, flexible tissue within that upon treatment would stretch and snap back to its original form. In her amazement, Mary Schweitzer also found what appeared to be blood vessels with what she believed were red blood cells with nuclei. Red blood cells in mammals don't have nuclei. Only reptiles and birds have those kind of red blood cells. The vessels were even revealed to be lined with specialized bone endothelial cells. Initially, some skeptics suggested that bacterial biofilms had formed what only appeared to be blood vessels and blood cells. Bacterial biofilms are when dead bacteria aggregate, forming kind of a slime. However, very recently, Schweitzer and her coworkers found biochemical evidence of intact fragments of the protein collagen, which is a component of connective tissue, and very important because collagen is a highly distinctive protein not made by bacteria. So it proved that what they were seeing was not a bacterial biofilm, but in fact blood vessels. In 2005, they found a dinosaur was found in the stomach of a mammal. Now you got to be an expert, because over there in the upper right is the contents of the stomach of that mammal, and you got to be an expert on dinosaurs to know that that stuff is a dinosaur, but that's what they say it is, that there's a dinosaur found in the stomach of this mammal. And not only do stomach contents shouldn't be preserved in any kind of normal environmental situation, unless you're talking about catastrophic flood burial, but the reason why this was such a monumental discovery at the time was that at the time this mammal was discovered, it was believed that mammals of this size did not live at the time of the dinosaurs. Based on their interpretation of the fossil record, it was believed that mammals of this size had evolved later. You cannot convince them. Their interpretation is incorrect unless you literally find one animal in the belly of one animal in the stomach of another. Hadrosaurs, remember, was that big duck-billed dinosaur that I showed you. We have found hadrosaurs discovered with skin, stomach contents, and even unfossilized bone. The stomach contents of some of these hadrosaurs were so well preserved that they were able to figure out where they live. Originally, now I don't know if you remember the original picture I showed you, but it showed one of these big hadrosaurs down in kind of a swampy area. That's an artist's conception based on where they used to believe they lived. Because waterfowl, other animals today that have these kinds of bills, use them to sift through mud. They're waterfowl. But so hadrosaurs were assumed to be kind of swampy creatures using their duck bills in the same way, but they were able to find stomach contents of hadrosaurs so well preserved, we now know that they in fact were mountainous creatures, eating plant material high up in the mountains. And again, we have found unfossilized hadrosaur bone. A display at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks contains this hadrosaur toe bone that is not fossilized, and allowing visitors to touch real dinosaur bone. The caption, I don't know if you can read the caption there, it says, "This is real dinosaur bone from a hindfoot of a genus of hadrosaur. Although it is 69 million years old, it is still original bone and not rock." I'll tell you, how do you get original, still have bone after 69 million years? Requires some extraordinary conditions, to tell you what. In 2014, an ankylosaur was discovered in Montana and dated to 75 million years old in the sandstone of the Judith River Formation. It is the most complete ankylosaur discovered to date, said to be 99% complete, and included the skull and the tail club. Remember, these are one of these animals that had that massive tail club. Now, this specific specimen, again discovered in 2014, was originally given the species name Zool crivivastor. Crivivastor. Okay, but Zool, okay, is the important, this is kind of a funny thing, okay. So Zool, I don't know if any of you movie buffs recognize Zool, but this is, they thought it looked like Zool from the Ghostbusters, one of these dragons that was in the Ghostbusters at the time, Zool. So they named it Zool. Amazing preservation like that can only happen one way. It has to be buried massively by sediments before it has time to decompose. In May 2017, the Alberta Museum unveiled a nodosaur for exhibition after 7,000 hours of work preparing it. It was discovered by a heavy equipment operator in oil sand mine in northern Alberta, Canada in 2011. Now, nodosaurs, like the one you see here, were plant-eating dinosaurs, but they were packing some serious armor as well. A lot of these dinosaurs, may not have been very threatening to us, but to someone trying to eat it, I bet you this one would put a hurt to you. So that armor was protected it well from some of the big predators that were alive at the time with it. It was dated at 110 million years old, and it is described as the best preserved fossil of its kind ever found. Let me just give you a few quick looks at this amazing nodosaur. It had those big spikes like you saw in this picture surrounding its neck. Let me give you a little better look at those massive spikes that it had on its neck. One of them, I'll shift back just a little ways to show you the longest of these spikes was 20 inches long. Had one spike sticking out of its shoulder that was 20 inches long. Their back were covered in protective plates called scutes or osteoderms, protective covering that was embedded into their skin. These were made out of keratin, like your hair and fingernails, similar kind of material. Protective scutes you see there. We'll look at it. We'll see one of these again later. The head of this is so well preserved. You can almost see it looking out at you. Look at that preserved eye right there. I'll zoom in a little bit so get a little better look at you. And if you look right behind its eye, you can see some of its skin. A tremendously well-preserved skin for a dinosaur. Its ribs were preserved. You can see its ribs there. Even its stomach contents were preserved. Those little circular shapes there was whatever this dinosaur had just eaten for its last meal. Again, another look at some of its spikes and the skin. See on the far left side of that image, the skin of this nodosaur, exquisite. But again, one of the main questions we want to address is what happened to the dinosaurs? Again, if we're correct about this, that the fossil record is a result of a global flood, and I believe it is. I believe the characteristics of the fossil record just speak enormously to the accuracy of this event. A terrible event brought about by God's judgment, destroyed the entire world, and all of these massive fossils that you see that are so well preserved are preserved the way they are because they were buried so rapidly during this event. Okay, so if this is true, that the dinosaur fossils and in general the fossil record is the result of a global flood, well, one thing the Bible does say with certainty, and that's that 2 of every kind of animal that was alive at the time of the flood was put on board Noah's Ark. 2 of every kind. It says they will come to you to be kept alive. So every animal, every terrestrial animal, land animal with the breath of life that was alive at the time of the flood would have been put on board Noah's Ark and then released after. So the logistical question we need to address then, is that possible? Because some of these dinosaurs were really big. Could these dinosaurs fit on board Noah's Ark? Well, Noah's Ark was a big, massive vessel, 450 feet long, size of 1.5 foot, length of 1.5 football fields, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. It was 3 stories tall, 75 feet wide. This was a massive vessel. Massive vessel. Well, one of the things that we got to keep in mind is that there weren't a whole lot of different types of dinosaurs. I showed you the main groups. There are only like 7 main groups of dinosaurs, lots of individual species as well, but it's only, not a tremendous number of dinosaurs. And if we're correct about evolution, about how speciation and diversifications of kinds took place, most of your creation biologists regard the family level of classification, at least within the mammals, to probably be synonymous with the biblical kind. So, for example, the felines, the family Felidae, that contains all the cats, was a biblical kind. There would have been just one pair of cats on board Noah's Ark. And all of the felines that we know of today have all descended from one pair of felines that was on board the Ark. So the lions and the tigers and the cheetahs and all the domestic cats and your bobcats and everything else have all descended from one pair of cats that was on board the Ark. The canines as well. Now there were one pair of unclean animals, 7 pairs of clean animals, but for the canines, an unclean animal as well, all the family Canidae, all of the canines, your wolves and your foxes and your jackals, and think about the amount of variety that you see in all the dog breeds. That's the kind of a variability that was available to the canines, to that one pair of canines that was on board Noah's Ark. Okay, so if this is to think about this amount of variability, and then you can better understand why there didn't have to be a whole lot of dinosaurs on board Noah's Ark. Because there's a ceratops family also, like the Triceratops. There was a family of ceratops, a bunch of different species of ceratops, but there only needed to be one pair of those. Not every one of the species of ceratops that we found needed to be on board Noah's Ark. There was a bunch of different hadrosaurs, including like your Pachycephalosaur and all these, a whole bunch of different hadrosaurs, but there would only needed to be one pair of hadrosaurs, not all the different species from all the different genera, just one pair from that family needed to be on board Noah's Ark. But some of these are really big, so what about the size of these things too? Some of them were massive, like the big Giganosaurus, the theropods, like I showed you the Giganosaurus. The T-Rex is also a theropod along with the Giganosaurus. And some of these are really big, but look at the Tyrannosaur family. Okay, at the size difference of the various members of the Tyrannosaur family. We know of the biggest ones are the most famous. So we know of the T-Rex because in the Tyrannosaur family, it was the biggest species. The Tyrannosaurus Rex was the biggest of all the Tyrannosaurs, but they weren't all that big. I mentioned before that some of the theropods were no bigger than the size of a chicken, We know the famous ones, the big ones, the ones that were the most scary, the most monstrous. We would love to have seen one of those big ones from a distance, maybe with the big scope, see one of the big ones off in a field someplace, maybe not up close. But look, and the ceratops as well, There were some really big ceratops. The Triceratops, again, one of the biggest of all the ceratops, but others were no bigger than a cow or even smaller. And the Bible specifically says the animals will come to you to be kept alive. Remember, God sent those animals to Noah to be kept alive. God would have specifically chosen the animals with the right health and the right age and the right size that was to be released on the earth after the flood. And then consider the typical growth curve. Okay, even if some of these, you think about the sauropods, those were pretty massive animals, but this is just a typical graph of a growth curve of the Tyrannosaur family. Okay, typical growth curve that you see amongst most animals, where the area where they shoot up real fast, that's like in junior high, right? Junior high, when they shoot up and they grow out of a pair of shoes about every 6 months, okay, So you could also argue the point that, God sent those animals to Noah to be kept alive. If one of them was too sizable to be manageable on the boat, he could have brought a 10-year-old to him at the right size when it was really healthy. You could argue that point as well. I don't think it's necessary, given the varieties of sizes that you see in these families. There were smaller varieties for all of them. Okay? Logistically, I don't think there's a problem. Could the dinosaurs have fit on board Noah's Ark? I just don't see a problem with that. Logistically, I think they could, and I think they did. Okay, if the Bible is an accurate history book, and if our interpretation of the fossil record is correct as being due to the global flood, then the dinosaurs are part of the fossil record. They had to be alive at the time of the global flood. They were on board Noah's Ark as well. So then the big question remains, if they were on board Noah's Ark and reintroduced after, then can we point to evidence of people after the flood that knew about these animals? Can we point to that? Now, there's a couple of things for consideration here. We really shouldn't expect to find the word dinosaur mentioned anywhere in ancient history books, because the word dinosaur was coined very recently. The first dinosaur actually was discovered in 1822. The first dinosaur that was discovered wasn't discovered until 1822. The word dinosaur was coined in 1842. This graphic says 41, but Sir Richard Owen coined the word dinosaur, which basically means terrible lizard. Terrible lizard. Saur is a part of the word that means lizard. Before the word dinosaur was coined, however, animals of this type were spoken of throughout history, collectively referred to by the term dragon. Dragons. This is just a common name for this general group of animals that has been known for centuries. The fossil shown here is a species of Pachycephalosaur. This is a full look at the skeleton of this specific dinosaur. The species name that it was given is Dracorex hogwartsia, which means the dragon of Hogwarts. This is the dragon of Hogwarts. In May 2017, a new dinosaur species was discovered. The species name given to it was Bilbilong sinensis, which means the baby dragon of China. Everyone recognizes that dinosaurs possess the characteristics ascribed to dragons of old. Just for whatever reason, the obviousness of this interpretation that these were dinosaurs has been lost or avoided because paleontologists have asserted that dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. So the history that I'm about to show you of dinosaurs that have been known throughout the centuries for every civilization in the world we're just meant to ignore that, forced to ignore that. But every place you look, every country in the world, we're talking from Scandinavia, throughout Europe, England, over here in Mesoamerica, every country that has records going back into antiquity invariably contains records and stories, depictions of dragons, the people who had seen them or had killed them, revered as heroes. They are a part of human history, as anything else has been. The Chinese zodiac, for example, contains multiple different animals, all of them everyday animals. The only animal on there that's not an everyday animal we can all recognize is a dragon. Several countries have dragons on their national flags, such as the UK country of Wales and the Kingdom of Bhutan in Southeast Asia. This city seal in the Netherlands from 1925 has a dragon on its city seal. The scene there is inspired by Revelations, where Michael kills the dragon. That was Satan. But look at the dragon itself. It's not the fanciful creatures we tend to see, but something rather small. We'll look at some more of these. The mystery is so profound that every civilization on earth seems to know about dragons. Every people group, no matter where you look, no matter what language they speak, where the culture is, everyone seems to know about dragons. And it is, in fact, is such a mystery that people have looked into it and proposed some fairly wild speculations as to why this must be. It's a big mystery, but explaining it's kind of difficult. Too many cultures, too many civilizations all around the globe, peoples that have had no connection with one another. Everyone seems to know what the dragon is. And we can also find dragons mentioned in several different books of the Bible. It's the Hebrew word for dragon is the word pronounced tenin. Now, translations of the King James Version were published in 1611 when the word dragon was commonly used to describe large reptiles, dragons, serpents, or even sea monsters that have been reported for centuries. It is also important to note that the word serpent has changed through time. In Old English diction, a serpent referred to a reptile with a long neck and long tail. A snake was a legless serpent. So whatever the serpent was that was mentioned in the Garden of Eden, it wasn't a snake. It was a reptile with a long neck and long tail. I view it as like a big T-Rex or the big Giganosaurus talking to Eve. And for whatever reason, it has the voice of the plant on Little Shop of Horrors. Anyone? Hey, Seymour, I can see that big T-Rex trying to tempt Eve. Hey, Eve, did God really say Little Shop of Horrors? Anyone? Hey, go look it up. People never know my jokes anymore. Half of my references in my classroom are movie references. If they're not movie buffs, they don't understand much of what I say. Anyway, here's a reference from the Bible for a dragon. This is again from Isaiah. In that day, the Lord with his sore and great sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, the crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. Leviathan is described in the book of Job as a fire-breathing sea monster. And fire-breathing is specifically stated. I'm going to read you a little bit of the book of the description of Leviathan from the book of Job, but I'd encourage you to go back home and read the entire description, because whatever this thing was, it was formidable and it definitely breathes fire. The description of it breathing fire, it gives multiple different descriptions that it breathed fire. Can you draw Leviathan with a fishhook? Around his teeth there is terror. His strong scales are his pride, shut up as with a tight seal. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. Out of his nostrils smoke goes forth as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coal and a flame goes forth from his mouth. The sword that reaches him cannot avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He regards iron as straw, bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned into stubble for him. Bible commentaries, often, especially like the NIV and some of these later translations, have suggested that was probably just an alligator or a crocodile. Since it was definitely an animal known to Job and his friends, God was describing this animal. Read the book of Job. This is God speaking. He's describing his creation. Where were you when I made these and these and these? And describes Leviathan to Job and his friends. An animal that was clearly known by them. And if it was known by them, it had to be just an animal like an alligator or crocodile. It couldn't be a dinosaur because, scientists say they went extinct 65 million years ago. But whatever this was, it was much more formidable than an alligator and crocodile, because we can kill these things with spears and arrows and those kind of things. And whatever this was, those were just no object of threat to it. There's another animal described in the book of Job that is also probably a dinosaur. It's called a behemoth. Behold now, behemoth, which I made as well as you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold now, his strength is his loins, and his power is in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. The NASB describes the tail as it bends like a cedar. The NIV, it says it sways like a cedar. Some of the Bible commentaries will argue that this was either an elephant or hippopotamus, because again, it had to be a modern animal, something known to Job and his friends, but the description of its tail doesn't fit either of those animals, because neither of them have a tail that bends like a cedar or sways like a cedar. Both of them have a little spindly tail. And not to get a little gross here, but here we go. The hippopotamus actually uses its tail like a propeller to mark bushes with feces. Yeah, it'll back up next to a bush, and as it's pooing, it'll use its tail like a propeller to spray feces all over its bush. It doesn't bend like a cedar. Clearly, it flicks it around, like it's a little spindly tail. But the description of the tail here just does not match any of the claims of this animal being big tail that bends like a cedar. Doesn't match an elephant, and it doesn't match a hippopotamus. The only animals that we know of that had a tail of this immensity, like a cedar tree, would have been one of the big dinosaurs, like one of your big sauropods. I'm going to walk you through a bunch of other descriptions of dragons throughout history. Herodotus mentioned seeing what are probably pterosaurs, like a pterodactyl. The Greek historian Herodotus noted these observations in the 5th century BC. He says, there is a place in Arabia, situated near the city of Buto, to which I went on hearing of some winged serpents. And when I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such great quantities as it was be impossible to describe. The form of the serpent is like that of a water snake, but he has wings without feathers and as like as possible to the wings of a bat. The only reptile that we know that had membranous wings like a bat were the pterosaurs, like your pterodactyls. There's also a dragon mentioned in an apocryphal chapter of Daniel. Apocryphal books were books that are not included within our canon. There are some books like the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch that are in their entirety not included within the Protestant canon, but you can find them in like the Catholic Bible and some others. But there's also certain chapters, like this one chapter, part of chapter 14 in Daniel has been removed from the canon because it describes Daniel killing a dragon. And of course, dragons didn't exist at that time. Now this follows, to understand what's happening here, this is part of a narrative called Bel and the Dragon. Before the incident that's taking place in this part that I'm going to read, Daniel challenges Nebuchadnezzar about an idol that they were worshiping called Bel, a big brass idol called Bel that people were bringing food to, and then the idol would eat the food. And when they came back the next day, the food would all be gone. And so Daniel challenged that this idol was not eating that food. And so he challenged the king on it and tested it by sprinkling a light coating of powder on the floor of the temple. And when they came back in the next day, they saw human footprints all over the powder. And so it was clear that people had been coming in and stealing the food. Okay? Then he challenges Nebuchadnezzar about the dragon that they were worshiping. And in that same place there was a great dragon which they of Babylon worshipped. And the king said unto Daniel, Wilt thou say that this is also of brass? Lo, he liveth, he eateth, he drinketh. Thou cannot say he is no living God, therefore worship him. Then said Daniel unto the king, I will worship the Lord my God, for he is the living God. But give me leave, O king, and I shall slay this dragon without sword or staff. The king said, I give you leave. Then Daniel took pitch and fat and hair, and sewed them together, and make lumps thereof. This he put in the dragon's mouth, and so the dragon burst in sunder. And Daniel said, Lo, these are the gods you worship. And it's where Daniel kills a dragon that was worshipped in Babylon. And we know that the Babylonians did worship dragons, or regarded dragons of this form. This is a dragon, which we again believe was a type of dinosaur, that is detailed on the Ishtar Gate, which currently is in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. The Ishtar Gate in Babylon was constructed in about 575 BC by King Nebuchadnezzar II, but also depicted on the gate are cattle and other animals that are everyday common animals to us, but a dragon. Alexander the Great reported seeing dragons that people in India were worshiping. In 1330 BC, after Alexander the Great invaded India, he brought back reports of seeing a great hissing dragon living in a cave, which the people were worshiping as a god. Subsequent Greek rulers are said to have brought dragons back alive from Ethiopia. In the floor of this mosaic, located in an artificial cave in Palestrina, Italy, that dates to 100 BC, the exotic fauna, the animal life of the Nile is illustrated. Lots of animals can be found in the mosaic, and all of them are given names. I wish someone could read. They all have a name underneath them, but lots of animals shown in the mosaic, but one stands out as not belonging. I'll circle it for you there and then blow it up. The animal shown here on this mosaic has 4 legs, a long tail, a long neck, and a bird's beak. What looks like a bird's beak. And the only animals that we know of that have those characteristics are some of the ornithischian dinosaurs that we looked at. In Mesoamerica, the temple of the feathered serpent shown here dominates the Teotihuacan, pre-Columbian archaeological site in Central America. Now, the structure you see here is notable partly due to the discovery in the 1900s of more than 100 possibly sacrificial victims that were found buried beneath the structure. The burials, like the structure, are dated to somewhere between 150 and 200 AD, The pyramid gets its name from the representations of the feathered serpent deity which cover its sides. Every single one of those little nooks that you see there originally had one of these feathered serpent carvings on it. I'll blow one up for you so you can see it. Note that the feathered serpent, as it is called, had feathers around its head. A characteristic possessed by, that we now know was possessed by some dinosaurs, but this is only recently learned by paleontologists. These are some of the earliest known representations of this feathered serpent, often identified with a much later Aztec god called Quetzalcoatl. Beowulf, you may know, was a legendary, heroic dragon slayer who lived during the 6th century AD. And he's memorialized in an epic Old English Anglo-Saxon story by the same name. He traveled to assist the Danish king known as Hrothgar, for whom his father was currently in service. Hrothgar had a great hall called Heorot that was being plagued by a dragon called a Grendel who had attacked the Danes for 12 years with impunity. At the request of the king, Beowulf came with 14 warriors to assist with the destruction of the monsters. Beowulf was apparently already legendary for this ability to kill some of these large monsters as a famous hunter. He first killed several sea reptiles, sea dragons. Then he killed the dragon called a Grendel that was attacking the Great Hall, and then later lost his life fighting a flying serpent that may have been a pterosaur. Although the events that have been in this story have been held to be fictitious due to the existence of a dragon, the dating of many of the events and people have been confirmed by archaeological excavations. The barrows, or grave mounds as they're called, which were held by Swedish tradition, have been identified for several of the people mentioned in the Beowulf epics. The names and relationships of the people in the Beowulf epics have been identified as being accurate. Beowulf's own grave mound was identified in 1950. This is Beowulf's grave mound. He was a real person, a real hero. Recent excavations in Denmark, in addition, where the Scandinavian tradition located the royal family of the Danes mentioned in the Beowulf epic, have revealed a great hall that existed at the exact time and place that's mentioned in the Beowulf epic. 3 halls in total were found that were 50 meters long during these excavations, and today the majority of scholars now view the people in the epic story, such as King Hrothgar and the royal family of the Danes mentioned there, as having been based on real people who lived during the 6th century. It's a little bit odd for a fictitious tale to weave into it so much historical accuracy, but it's quite probable that it's a little more historical than they think. Legend has it that the origin of the word gargoyle traces back to a 7th century dragon known in France as a gargoyle or goji. The dragon gargoyle is said to have appeared in the Seine River in France, terrorizing boats. It was described as a colossal monster with a long neck, a slender snout, and eyes gleaming like moonstones. In legend, the person who killed it was the Bishop Romanus. Several different accounts of this have been found, but they all tend to share certain attributes. The Bishop Romanus of Rouen, the name of that town in France is very oddly pronunciated, so I just butchered it, but it is said that he delivered the country from this monster with the aid of a convict. He was able to lure the creature back to town. When they got the thing back to town, the townspeople attacked it, killed it, burned it, and then mounted the head of the dragon on the cathedral. And later, reproductions of it were made that have been throughout the following centuries used as grotesques or even as water spouts. But the origin of that word, gargoyle, appears to have come from an actual dragon legend. The Wawel dragon is a famous dragon in Polish folklore, also known as the Dragon of Krakow. According to the legend, it lived in a cave under Wawel Hill, that's its name, in the 8th century. The cave, which is now a popular tourist attraction, is on the banks of the Vistula River in Krakow, Poland, where there is now a statue, the statue that you see there, that breathes fire periodically, or you can get it to breathe fire when you send a text message. Such is the day of modern dragon legends. The dragon is said to have eaten nearby cattle, and after many attempts to kill it, the beast was ultimately poisoned by stuffing a ram with sulfur through bait poisoning, similar to what Daniel did. The hero, a man named Cracus, later became the monarch and namesake for the city. Thus it's referred to as the Dragon of Krakow. Cracus is credited with building Wawel Castle on the castle on Wawel Hill above the cave where the dragon was laired. The cave shown there is a popular tourist attraction, and bones are hanging. You can see the bones there are hanging on the cathedral, nearby cathedral, that are said to have come from the dragon's cave, probably one of its victims, believed to have been one of its prey. And there's a plaque there on the cathedral that reads, Cracus, a Polish prince, ruled from AD 730 to 750. Here is the cave in which, having killed the wild dragon, he settled at Wawel and founded the city Krakow. That's a part of history. This carving was originally on the walls of an 8th century Saxon Minster church. A little bit hard to make out here, but it shows what appears to be several biped animals that are walking on 2 legs. If you look at it closely, you can see animals walking on 2 legs that are attacking another group of animals that are 4-legged animals. And Bill Cooper, in his book After the Flood, suggested, because this is a Saxon carving, much like the Beowulf epic, he argued that the biped animals depicted in this may in fact be the Grendel spoken of in the Beowulf epic. Pushing further into time here, the Temple of Kukulkan is a Mesoamerican step pyramid that dominates the center of the Chichen Itza archaeological site in the Mexican state of the Yucatan. Built also by a pre-Columbian Mayan civilization sometime between the 9th and 12th century AD. At the foot of the pyramid, shown here, on the circle that I've made there for you, is a carving of Kukulkan, which was also a feathered serpent. Feathered serpent deity, closely related to the feathered serpent I showed you before, and Quetzalcoatl, known to the Aztecs and other central Mexican cultures. This is Angkor Wat. The complex, the name basically means temple ruins. Angkor Wat, shown there, was built by King Suryavarman II in the early 12th century as his state temple and part of his capital city. On one of the stone pillars within the temple complex was found this carving that most everyone immediately recognizes to closely resemble a stegosaur. Now, one of the claims that's often made about these ancient depictions of dinosaurs is that these ancient peoples just figured out what they look like the way we have. They had found fossils. They were able to figure out what those fossils look like and created reconstructions of them. The problem with that is, in particular for the stegosaur here, is that the stegosaur plates, much like the osteoderms possessed by the ankylosaur, were not attached to its skeleton. They're simply embedded into its skin. And we, in fact, when they were originally discovered, did not know how those plates fit. And it was originally thought that they laid flat on their back, similar to how the scutes are laid on the ankylosaur. It took a great deal of time for them to figure out that those plates actually stood upright. And it's just not probable that peoples in antiquity that haven't done the due diligence that we have in paleontology would have been able to figure out what these things look like. In fact, that those plates stood upright on his back like that. Marco Polo traveled throughout Asia, Persia, China, and Indonesia in between 1271 and 1291 AD. and recorded his journeys in a work titled The Travels of Marco Polo, which was published in 1300 AD. Much of his book detailed the interesting customs of the different ethnic groups he encountered, as well as the varieties of animals and plants associated with them. But in chapter 49, he describes a dragon found in the province of Karajan, which he relayed in a very matter-of-fact manner, without any embellishments or mythologizing. He also goes on to explain the behavior of the creature and how the people of the area had killed them. Listen to Marco Polo's account. He says, "Here are found snakes and huge serpents, 10 paces in length and 10 spans in girth," which is equates to 50 foot long and 100-inch circumference. The forepart near the head, they have 2 short legs, each with 3 claws, as well as eyes larger than a loaf and very glaring. The jaws are wide enough to swallow a man. The teeth are large and sharp, and their whole appearance is so formidable that neither man nor any kind of animal can approach them without terror. Others are of small size, being 8, 6, or 5 paces. 3 clawed fingers and toes. I didn't emphasize that when we were looking at the theropods. That's a characteristic of the big theropods, like your T-Rex. They all had 3 clawed fingers and toes and the little small arms that you tend to see. But that's a pretty good description of what we now call a theropod. Richard Bell was a bishop of Carlisle, Cumbria, in northwest England, who died in the year 1496 and was buried in a tomb in the Carlisle Cathedral. His tomb is inlaid with brass engravings that show Bell dressed in his vestments with his bishop cap and hooked staff. But also contained on the engravings are 2 interesting animals. Next to these animals are found next to other animals: fish, a dog, an eel, a bird, a pig, and other things are found there. And these 2 interesting creatures that the tomb designer clearly intended to be taken literally as the other animals. If you look closely, portrayed are 2 animals seemingly engaged in a struggle. The animal on the right has a long neck and a long tail, much like a sauropod dinosaur. Interestingly for this, though, both the necks and the tails of these animals are positioned horizontally. And this is interesting because paleontologists, only until very recently, believed that the necks of sauropods were held vertically aloft and the tails were laying lazily on the ground. It wasn't until very recently that they started modeling these sauropod dinosaurs as having both their necks and the tails positioned horizontally, just as they're shown in this brass engraving. This is what's called an Ica stone, one of the burial stones found in Peru. The original stones that were found dated to the 16th century and have been found with images of dinosaurs, such as the ceratops you see here. The Inca stones, as they came to be known, are a collection of over 15,000 carved stones discovered in the vicinity of Ica, Peru. The images on the original stones were apparently pre-Columbian and buried in large numbers in graves along these hillsides, along with some North American mummies. The earliest known Europeans reported the artifacts from the Spanish priest and Jesuit missionaries. In particular, Father Simon in 1535 reported the stones. Samples were sent back to Spain as early as 1562. In more modern times, they became famous for a large collection that had been assembled by Dr. Javier Cabrera and his family. Most of the stones are now in possession of this one family, and many more recent reproductions have been made. A lot of these stones are now coming out of the area that are clearly reproductions and being sold just as artwork, not the original stones coming out, but a number of them have been pulled out that show animals that are clearly dinosaurs that appear to be authentic. Every natural history book before the 1800s contains scientific descriptions of dragons. And as there were many types of dinosaurs, there were also many types of dragons mentioned in these ancient times. For example, one known as a cockatrice and another known as a basilisk. There was also a knucker and the grendel we mentioned previously. The Historia Naturalis was an encyclopedia published in AD 77 to 79 by Pliny the Elder, which was translated to German and illustrated in 1584. Now, regarding these illustrations, it's important to note that these were often made much later than the original sightings. The original descriptions were made, and so the engraver of these illustrations had no way of verifying the accuracy of some of these depictions. And often some of them seem to be composites of multiple dinosaurs by peoples of ancient times who had heard of different accounts of different dinosaurs, but assumed there was only really one type. So a lot of them seem to be composites. But let you look at a few of these. This one comes from the Cosmographia, an early geography book and one of the most successful and popular books of the 16th century. It saw a full 24 editions, this book did. And along with its many maps, it included descriptions of flora and fauna from around the world. This is of one of the dragons called a basilisk, known from antiquity. It comes from the Greek word basilikos, meaning little king. The name refers to the fact that it has a crown on its head. Note the other important characteristics, that it has what appears to be large plates, coverings on its back, and a long tail. This animal is remarkably similar to an ankylosaur. It also has a bird-like beak. So bird-like beak, crown-like structure on its head, the plates or osteoderm, what we call scutes on its back. Pretty close rendering. Some of these ancient names, like the basilisk, have appeared in the Bible. The basilisk is mentioned in the Psalms in the Catholic Bible, shown here. A fiery flying serpent is also described in Isaiah, which might be a pterosaur. Some have argued that was just a venomous snake, being referred to as fiery, but it's a flying serpent, not sure what else flew. That was a serpent other than one of the big pterosaurs. In Isaiah 14, a cockatrice is mentioned. Cockatrice was one of the other names that one type of dragon was known of as antiquity. It's mentioned there along with the fire-flying serpent. A cockatrice was described and illustrated in several works. This one is from the Mundus Subterraneus, a 12-volume World Digest published in 1665. The cockatrice was described as a biped, two-legged animal that possessed features of both fowl and reptiles. So it had a bird's beak, but a long reptilian tail, and had some feathery plumage. And we now know that there were several theropod dinosaurs that possessed these characteristics, such as the ornithomimosaur, shown here, whose name means the bird mimic lizard. This booklet was published in 1614 in the Sussex County of England, describing encounters with a large reptile near the village that became later known as Dragon's Green. The booklet contains speculations about the reproduction, believes supernatural abilities, along with some lucid descriptions of a dragon that was slain in a neighboring Sussex County, and numerous references to even more ancient historical sources. Here is part of the text. It reads, "The serpent, or dragon as some call it, is reputed to be 9 feet, or rather more in length, and shaped almost as in the form of an axle-tree of a cart. A quantity of thickness in the middle and somewhat smaller on both ends." So like an axle, big in the middle, long neck and a long tail, right? The former part, the front part, which shoots forth as a neck, is supposed to be 3 feet 9 inches long, with a white ring of, as it were, of scales around it. The scales along its back seem to be blackish, and so much as is discovered under its belly appears to be red. It is likewise discovered to have large feet, but the eye may be there deceived, for some suppose the serpents have no feet. The dragon rides away, as we call it, as fast as a man can run. There are likewise upon either side of him discovered two great bunches so big as a large football, and as some think will in time grow to wings. But God, I hope, will to defend the poor people of the neighborhood, that he will be destroyed before he grows to fledge. This depiction of a dragon is found in Mundus Subterraneus, again, which has some inaccuracies because in particular, we know enough about flight at this point to recognize that an animal with this mass would not be able to fly with some little bitty wings the way it has. But it could be argued that this is either a composite. Again, people knew of pterosaurs and they knew of land dragons, and they're kind of confusing the two descriptions together. Or it occurred to me that this also possessed similar characteristics to a Dimetrodon. I mean, the structure on its back there, what is called a neural spine sail, could have been mistaken by peoples of antiquities as wings that were in the process of developing. In 1669, a pamphlet was published about what was called the Hinnom dragon, which had been sighted by several citizens and killed in the Essex County in England. It reads, "A true relation or monstrous serpent, which have in diverse times been seen at a parish called Hinnom on the Mount, within 4 miles of Saffron Walden, showing the length, proportion, and bigness of the serpent, the place where it commonly lurks, and what means had been used to kill it. Also the discourse of other serpents, and particularly a cockatrice, killed at Saffron Walden. Today, Hinnom is best known for the dragon that was killed there, which is still displayed proudly on their town sign, shown there." In 1723, the Natural History of Switzerland book published an account of a shepherd seeing a dragon in central Switzerland. And although the animal initially looks kind of fanciful and unrealistic, we need to look at it for its essential characteristics. Again, it's got 3 clawed fingers and toes, which is typical of theropods. It's got a long neck and a long tail. It's got a crown-like structure on its head. We tend to jump to a face of it that looks like a lion, but probably due to the fact that it was described to have teeth like a lion. Because these dinosaurs either had a bird's beak or they had teeth. And if you were trying to describe this thing, it would either describe it as having a bird's beak or teeth like a lion, and the artist would end up rendering that as a face like a lion, perhaps. But again, look at long neck and long tail, 3 clawed fingers and toes, and a crown-like structure on its head. Now compare it with this theropod dinosaur called the Dilophosaurus. Had these same characteristics: long neck, long tail, 3 clawed fingers and toes, and look at the crown-like structure on its head. And now consider, if you had seen that animal, how long you would stand there and take a mental picture. Would you sit there and make a sketch of that thing, or so that you could give an accurate description later? I'd assume that about a 3-second glance would be followed by 10 minutes of running. That's what probably running from that thing pretty fast. This is a reproduction of a petroglyph, a rock art that was originally discovered in 1879 in the Havasupai Canyon in Arizona in 1924. In 1924, a scientific expedition was later sent to the canyon to document the artifacts and petroglyphs left behind by the Native Americans, and documented its existence, the existence of this petroglyph. Now, this is a very heavy desert varnish on this petroglyph, which authenticates its antiquity and thus its authenticity. The desert varnish on this petroglyph is just as thick as the other petroglyphs, which are known to be authentic, and it is questioned only because it seems to be a carving of a dinosaur. The director of that expedition in 1924, Samuel Hubert, said the following about the petroglyph. He said, "The fact that some prehistoric man made a petroglyph of a dinosaur on the walls of this canyon upsets completely all of our theories regarding the antiquity of man. Facts are stubborn and immutable things. If theories do not square with the facts, then theories must change, the facts remain." The until recently, even up until the early 1900s, the elderly folk around Claymorgan in Wales described a colony of winged serpents that lived in the woods around Penlyn Castle. That's again the flag of Wales, the dragon on the flag of Wales. They described them like this. The elderly inhabitants of Penlyn said that in his boyhood, the winged serpents were described as very beautiful. They were coiled when in repose and looked as if they were covered with jewels of all sorts. Some of them had crests sparkling with all the colors of the rainbow. When disturbed, they glided swiftly, sparkling all over, to their hiding places. When angry, they flew over people's heads with outspread wings, bright and sometimes with eyes too, like the feathers in a peacock's tail. Iridescence. He said it was no old story invented to frighten children, but a real fact. His father and uncle had killed some of them, for they were as bad as foxes on poultry. The old man attributed the extinction of the winged serpents to the fact that they were terrors in the farmlands and coverts. So one of the questions we're looking to answer is what happened to the dinosaurs? Since the dinosaurs in the fossil record were killed by the global flood, ultimately we're asking what happened to the dinosaurs then that were reintroduced after the flood? Now, most of the accounts that I've found of these dragons are about people that saw them and then either tried to kill them or killed them. The vast majority of the accounts of these animals, dragons, are of people that had killed these things. So, we want to ask the question: why kill them? Why would people have killed these things? Well, one possibility, maybe they tasted like chicken. I guess you could think I tried my little alligator when I was in Louisiana, and that's a really big drumstick on that big theropod. I'll tell you what, really big drumstick. But seriously, one of the main factors was probably fear. These were certainly the most fearful animals that God had ever created. And a lot of people naturally afraid of reptiles. Even little bitty snakes, for whatever reason, people have great fear over reptiles, and these were a monstrous sized reptile. So probably a lot of fear. Men also have a hunting instinct that causes them to hunt for trophy. Sad to say that a lot of them could have just been killed for trophies. A lot of the heroes of old were made heroes for killing dragons. You have a dragon that gets a little close to the village. You don't know if they're really a threat or not, but you have to assume they are, being their general appearance and being that you know little about them, and next thing you know, you send a troop of men out to kill the thing, and I think that's what happened to a lot of them. But a lot of it was probably due also to superstition, okay, and in particular due to the fact that in the Bible the dragon is frequently mentioned as being synonymous with Satan. Okay, consider both in the Garden of Eden. The serpent itself was Satan, right? Mentioned as Satan later, and as well in Revelation. Read this part in Revelation. There was a war in heaven, Michael the angel waging war with the dragon. The great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil or Satan. You can see a lot of depictions of this event throughout history and antiquity, of Michael the archangel killing a dragon, like the one you see here. This one dates to the 14th century. Or look at this, the lion. This shows a lion, which is the Christ, killing a basilisk. And look, it's not a big fanciful dragon. Birds-like beak. What are either scutes, looks like plates on its back, like the ankylosaur. People of old, heroic people of old, were many times people that had killed dragons. One of the most famous dragon slayers of history was St. George. There are St. George cathedrals made that can be found in almost every country in the world. I've seen several myself. A huge, monstrous sculpture of St. George the last time we were in Israel. I took a picture of it, but couldn't remember later where the picture was taken, and still I got to figure that out so I can put it in one of my slides. But interestingly, I looked it up, and there were actually a bunch of people sainted for killing dragons. This is a list of people sainted for killing dragons. Some that I mentioned, like Saint Romanus in France. Another kind of about 2/3 down, look at Martha of Bethany, also was sainted for killing a dragon. Lazarus' sister, who we know traveled to France as a missionary, was involved with killing a dragon, lured it back to the village the way the St. Romanus did, and it was killed by the village people, a dragon called a Tarasque that can still today be found in some Corpus Christi processions. But look at, this is not just history you can sweep under a rug. You know, people didn't get sainted willy-nilly by the Catholic Church. When an event took place that justified sainthood, they sent a contingent of people out to investigate the incident and verify its authenticity. This is history. These are not fanciful tales of folklore and mythology. This is history. People didn't get sainted willy-nilly by the Catholic Church. You know, this is what we're looking at as history. But geologists, your paleontologists, have decided themselves that the fossil record needs to be interpreted this way. This fossil record is a history of life on Earth, and based on our interpretation of it, the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, and so that's it. No one has ever seen these animals. These dinosaurs were never seen by humans. They died 65 million years ago, and so all of these historical accounts of animals that sound like dinosaurs and look like dinosaurs, all of these figurines and paintings and sculptures and carvings, we're just told to ignore all that. Because they believe fossils should be interpreted this way, we're told just to ignore all the history. But that's what it is. It's history. And it's a rich history. Every country on earth, every civilization that has records throughout antiquity invariably has some stories of these. One last verse before I close down from Timothy. It was prophesied that the time will come when men will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. You know, the story of the dragons and the dinosaurs, this connection is one of the places in creation apologetics where you really get a sense of how far people are from the truth. How far we've come from the truth. I mean, because there's so few people that understand this part, how this part of history fits into the Bible. And that these were real historical records, that these animals lived. Peoples throughout history have known about these creatures. And I think they would laugh at us. You bring one of these people up from history and they would just laugh at the fact that all of us think that these animals never existed with humans, even though people have always known about them. You really kind of get a sense of how far we've come from the truth and how we've accepted such a great myth of evolution, accepted this great myth that the fossil record is accumulated over long periods of time, instead of being what it obviously is, and that's a monument to the global flood and a reminder to us of how much God hates sin. We should never forget that. When we see those fossils, when we see the fossil record, it should be a reminder to us that that's how much God hates sin. He hates sin so much he destroyed the world by flood. And his hatred for sin has never changed. In fact, I would argue after sending his son, I have a feeling he hates us letting sin persist in our life even more. Now that he's sent his son, knowing that his son died for us, that we continue to allow sin in our lives, I would think that God would hate that even more than he did back in the days of Noah. Let me close out in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you so much that we have your word, your holy Bible, Father, for the tremendous insight that we have gained from it. For through it, we alone know the true history of the world. It has given us such insight to help us understand events like the global flood and how that relates to fossils, something that has been misinterpreted, taught as myth by our scholars and scientists today, Father. Father, we ask for wisdom. Give us wisdom to help us understand truth, to recognize truth, and discern it from all the misinformation that we see, Father. And strengthen us, Father. Help us to be bold in our testimony, not just in our testimonies about your Son, Yeshua, and the salvation that comes about through his sacrifice and our repentance, Father, but about your creation, about you, our Lord God, and what it is that you've made for us. Help us to be bold and and share this truth with the world who has gone so far from it. The world that is lost. Not just lost salvationally, but a world that does not know the true history of this world. Father, we praise you. We glorify and honor the name of the Lord God Almighty. Praise your holy name. Lord, be with us. Give us wisdom. Give us insight, Father. Forgive us of our sins. Convict us, Lord, and help us to become a righteous person we need to be. A righteous person that will glorify and honor you with all of our deeds, Father. We praise you and glorify you. Thank you, Lord. In Christ's name, all things, amen.